Mafia boss was having dinner with his fiancée and in-laws until a waitress whispered, "Run now." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was an ordinary evening at the luxurious restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. The soft glow of chandeliers reflected off the marble floors, casting long shadows as the night crowd mingled and the clinking of silverware filled the air. At one of the tables sat Dante Romano, a man known for his ruthless power in the city's underworld. He was seated with his fiancée, Caterina, a stunning blonde whose icy smile betrayed nothing of the drama that was about to unfold. Alongside them sat Caterina's parents, dressed in expensive suits, their laughter echoing through the room as they toasted to what seemed like a perfect evening. To the untrained eye, this was just another high-profile dinner, but to anyone who was paying close attention, it was far from ordinary. As Dante sat at the center of the table, his dark eyes scanned the room, never fully relaxing. There was something in the air, a subtle shift that most people couldn't sense, but for him, it was as clear as daylight. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, especially not in a room full of people who seemed to only have one thing in common: their ties to wealth and power. He had built his empire with blood, betrayal, and calculated moves, and in his world, there was no such thing as too careful. The dinner had started like any other. Caterina smiled, holding his arm possessively while her parents chatted about their latest business ventures. But something was off. Dante felt the unease creep up on him, a feeling he couldn't shake. He had dealt with threats before, but this felt different. A quiet unease gnawed at him, as if something, or someone, was watching. It was then that Emma, the waitress, stepped into view. She had been serving the table for the past hour, moving in and out of the shadows with quiet grace. Emma had been working at the restaurant for months now, doing her job and keeping her head down, never once attracting attention. But tonight, her instincts were on high alert. As she refilled their wine glasses, she couldn't help but notice the way Dante's eyes never left the room. He was constantly scanning, looking for something. And that's when she saw it. There, in the corner, by the far side of the room, Caterina's hand casually brushed against the table, her fingers slipping into her purse. Emma's stomach dropped as she saw the outline of a gun, a small, concealed weapon tucked away, likely for one very specific purpose. The fiancée wasn't who she claimed to be. Caterina wasn't just Dante's bride-to-be. She was a member of a rival family, sent to eliminate him. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her palms growing clammy. She knew what was happening now. She had to warn him. She had seconds to act. She couldn't stand by and watch a man die, even one as dangerous as Dante. But if she warned him and was wrong, she could be dead too. If she stayed silent and he died, she'd have to live with that guilt forever. She felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. This was no longer about being a waitress. It was about saving a life. Without thinking, she leaned down, her voice barely a whisper. "Run now." Emma's words hung in the air like a sharp knife. "Run now." She watched as Dante's dark eyes locked onto hers. There was no question, he understood. The briefest of moments passed, but it felt like an eternity. His expression didn't flicker, but Emma could feel the tension shift. He was aware. He was processing. She held her breath, waiting for his reaction. Time seemed to stand still. Caterina had left the table, slipping away to the bathroom in what appeared to be a perfectly timed exit, but Emma knew better. It wasn't a bathroom break. The gun in Caterina's purse was for one purpose only. And the moment the shot rang out, the life of the Mafia boss would be over. The silence between them stretched, and Emma's heart raced in her chest. Then, without warning, Dante sprang into action. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sharp movement caught everyone's attention. Caterina's family looked confused, but Emma could see the realization dawning on Dante's face. He had already figured out what she had tried to tell him. He moved with a predator's grace, instinctively pushing Emma behind him as he scanned the room. His hand went to his jacket, where he always carried a concealed weapon. Emma's pulse quickened. This was happening. The air in the restaurant had shifted. The tension was palpable, a thick fog of anticipation hanging in the air. Dante's eyes flicked toward the back of the room, where Katerina had just disappeared. His men were already moving into position, but he didn't wait. He motioned sharply for them to follow. "Get her out," he growled under his breath, his voice like steel. He was calm, calculating, the kind of man who had been trained to handle chaos with an almost eerie level of control. But even Dante could not anticipate the full extent of what was about to happen. As he moved swiftly toward the back of the restaurant, Emma stumbled behind him, still shaken by the magnitude of what she had just done. She had never been in this kind of situation before, and she could feel her body shaking. She had saved his life, she knew that. But what would happen next? Would he see her as just the waitress who had happened to warn him, or was there something deeper at play now? The room was descending into chaos. The quiet clatter of silverware on plates, the laughter, the casual conversations, everything was being drowned out by the frantic movements of the people who realized something was wrong. A man in a dark suit had stood up and was talking quickly into a hidden earpiece, signaling for reinforcements. But it wasn't fast enough. Dante moved like a man on a mission, and his bodyguards followed closely, clearing the path ahead of them. They reached the back hall, but before Dante could make his next move, the restaurant's back door burst open. Two masked men with guns stepped into the narrow hallway. Emma froze. The men had clearly been waiting for the signal. One of them raised his gun toward Dante, but before he could take a shot, Dante's bodyguards were already in motion, guns drawn. A shot rang out, the loud crack echoing through the hallway. One of the gunmen crumpled to the ground, while the other hesitated, thrown off by the rapid response. Dante didn't wait for the second man to act. He was already moving again, pushing Emma further behind him as his men took care of the threat. "Stay close," he commanded in a low voice. His tone was still calm, but there was an edge to it now, something dangerous. Emma nodded, her body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had never been so close to the edge of danger before. The men were down, but it wasn't over. Dante wasn't the type of person who would let a simple attack go unanswered. He would make sure the people who had just tried to kill him paid for their mistake. They reached the kitchen, where Dante paused for a split second to assess the situation. His eyes darted to the windows, the emergency exits, and the layout of the space, calculating his next move. He was always 2 steps ahead. Emma tried to keep up, but the reality of the situation was hitting her hard. She had just saved a Mafia boss's life, and now, she was caught in the crossfire of a battle she had never asked for. But there was no turning back now. As Dante turned to speak with his men, Emma caught her breath and dared to look up at him. For the first time, she saw something different in his eyes, something beyond the coldness of his usual demeanor. It was gratitude. It was respect. In that moment, Emma realized that she had just changed everything, and Dante's next move would change her life forever. The kitchen was a frenzy of movement, the clattering of pots and pans echoing through the tight space. Dante's bodyguards were securing the exit, checking for any other threats, but Dante remained focused, his eyes scanning the room with the cold precision of someone who had dealt with danger his entire life. Emma stood behind him, still trying to process everything that had just happened. She had saved his life, but the weight of that moment was sinking in. Her heart was still racing, her mind unable to keep up with the rapid-fire thoughts swirling inside her. Dante turned to her, his expression unreadable. He was a man of few words, but there was something in the way he looked at her now, something that spoke volumes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was respect, something he didn't give lightly. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but firm. She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She couldn't understand why he was treating her this way. She was just the waitress, the girl who served drinks and cleaned tables. She wasn't supposed to be part of his world, but now she was, and it terrified her. As they moved through the kitchen, Dante's men were already handling the aftermath. The gunmen were dead, but that wasn't the end of the story. Dante would make sure of that. He had built his empire with ruthlessness, but he was also a man of loyalty. And in his world, loyalty was a currency more valuable than anything else. They reached the back door, where Dante paused for a moment, taking in the situation. His mind was always working, always calculating the next step. "We need to move quickly," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Emma didn't need to ask where they were going. She could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was making sure that no one got away with this. No one who dared to cross him would walk free. This way, one of Dante's men called out, gesturing toward a narrow alley that led to an underground parking garage. Dante turned to Emma, his gaze piercing. "You're safe. Stay with me." She wanted to protest, wanted to tell him that she wasn't the one who needed protection, but the words caught in her throat. She had just risked everything to warn him. And now, here she was, caught in a world of danger and intrigue that she couldn't escape. She had no choice but to follow him. As they moved down the alley, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had no idea what she had just stepped into, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. They reached the garage, and Dante immediately headed toward a sleek black car parked in the corner. The doors opened, and Dante motioned for Emma to get in. She hesitated for a moment, but then her instincts kicked in. She had saved his life, and now he was offering her protection. It wasn't something she could refuse. As the door slammed shut behind her, the car roared to life, and they sped off into the night. The city was alive with lights, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was as if every street corner, every shadow, held danger. Dante sat across from her, his eyes cold and calculating, but there was something else there too, something human. He had saved her life when she least expected it. He had stepped in when no one else would. And now, she was part of his world. She wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it was too late to turn back now. The car wound its way through the city, the streets empty and dark. Dante's men were in a separate vehicle, flanking them as they made their way to a safe house. "We'll lay low for now," Dante said, breaking the silence. "The Volkov family won't stop until they get what they want. But we'll be ready." Emma swallowed hard. The Volkov family. She had heard rumors about them, but she never imagined she would be tangled up in their web. She had thought her life was simple: work, pay the bills, keep her head down. But now, she was part of something much bigger. And as much as she wanted to deny it, a part of her couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose. Dante had saved her, and in return, she had saved him. The balance between them had shifted, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. All she knew was that she couldn't run from it. Not now. Not anymore. It's been hours since they left the restaurant. The city lights blurred into a haze as the car sped down the empty streets, the soft hum of the engine filling the tense silence. Dante sat across from Emma, his eyes sharp, but his mind was clearly elsewhere, calculating, planning. She could feel the weight of his thoughts, the pressure of whatever he was about to do. The Volkov family wouldn't stop after tonight. They were too powerful, too connected. But Dante was different. He wasn't someone who could be taken down easily. He was a force. She wasn't sure why, but part of her admired that about him. The car made a sharp turn, heading deeper into the heart of Brooklyn. Emma, still shaken from everything that had happened, tried to steady herself. This wasn't a world she understood, but it was one she was now a part of. She had saved his life, and in return, he was giving her protection. What did that mean for her? She was just a waitress, just a girl trying to survive in a city that never seemed to care. Now, she was sitting in a car with a Mafia boss, heading to an undisclosed location, with danger following them like a shadow. They finally arrived at a nondescript building, a few stories tall, tucked away from the main road. The area was quiet, too quiet. Emma's heart raced as they got out of the car. Dante motioned for her to follow him. His presence was commanding, like he belonged here, like this was his world, and she was just a visitor. As they entered the building, the cold air hit her. The place was sparsely decorated, a few pieces of furniture scattered about, but there was a sense of order to it, a calm that Emma found unsettling. Dante led her down a narrow hallway to a room at the back of the building. He opened the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room with a few simple chairs and a desk. He stepped inside, and Emma hesitated before following him. The door clicked shut behind her. "This is where we lay low," Dante said, his voice steady but with an edge. "They'll be looking for us. The Volkovs won't stop until they find me, and when they do, they'll come after anyone in my way, including you." Emma nodded, her throat tight. She knew that this wasn't just about saving Dante anymore. It was about surviving in a world that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this. Dante turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'll protect you," he said, his voice softer now. But you need to understand something. This world is not forgiving. If you're going to be part of it, you need to make sure you're ready. Emma swallowed hard. She wasn't sure what he meant by part of it, but one thing was clear. She had already crossed the line. She was in this world now, and there was no turning back. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to live a normal life. Dante studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. Then, without warning, he stepped closer to her. The air between them seemed to shift. None of us asked for this, he said softly. But sometimes, the world chooses us. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She had always tried to keep her head down, to avoid drawing attention. But tonight, everything had changed. She had stepped into a world where power and danger were the currency, and survival meant playing by rules she didn't understand. As the silence stretched, Dante broke it again. You're safe here for now, but tomorrow, we make our next move. You need to be ready. Whatever happens, you need to trust me. Emma nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she didn't have a choice. She had already seen too much, been too close to the edge. She could only hope that she wasn't making a mistake by staying. Dante's eyes softened, just for a moment, and Emma caught a glimpse of the man behind the mask of power. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man who had lost, who had built his empire on the ashes of his past. And now, Emma was part of that. But she didn't know yet if she could survive it. She didn't know if anyone could. The next day felt like a blur. Emma had barely slept, her mind racing with the events of the previous night. The safe house Dante had brought her to was isolated, tucked away from the world, but it felt more like a prison than a refuge. The walls were bare, the air thick with tension. Dante had insisted she stay inside, away from prying eyes. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even here, in the relative safety of the house. She didn't understand the rules of this world. She was just a waitress, a simple girl who had been thrust into something much bigger than herself. Yet, for the first time, she felt like she was being seen, not for her job, not for her uniform, but for who she was, a person capable of saving a life. The door creaked open, and Dante entered, his sharp eyes scanning the room immediately. His presence was commanding, as always. Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of safety when he was near, despite the overwhelming danger that surrounded them. Ready? He asked, his voice calm, but with a hint of urgency. Emma nodded, her stomach tightening. Where are we going? She asked, her voice a little shaky. Dante paused, looking at her with those calculating eyes. I have a few things to take care of. You'll be with me. There was no explanation, no comfort, just a promise that she would be by his side. And despite the fear gnawing at her, Emma felt herself nodding, trusting him. Dante wasn't like the others. He wasn't a man who made empty promises. Whatever was coming, she knew she couldn't face it alone. The car ride was silent, the city of Brooklyn passing by in a blur of lights and shadows. Emma kept her eyes on the road ahead, trying to ignore the constant fluttering of her heart. She had no idea where they were going, or what Dante's next move was, but the certainty in his demeanor gave her a strange sense of reassurance. They arrived at a discreet building, its windows dark and its exterior unremarkable. Dante didn't say a word as he led her inside, his bodyguards flanking them. The inside of the building was far from what Emma had expected. It was sleek, modern, but still cold, with high ceilings and minimal decoration. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but there was a sense of emptiness, like the space had been designed for business, not comfort. Dante's presence in the room was enough to fill it with energy, though. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Stay close, he said as he glanced back at Emma, his eyes narrowing. This is a place for business. I need you to be quiet, to follow my lead. Emma nodded again, her heart racing. She wasn't sure if it was the danger or the proximity to Dante that made her feel this way. As they walked deeper into the building, Emma couldn't help but wonder what she had gotten herself into. But she wasn't about to back out now. The door ahead of them opened, revealing a group of men sitting around a table, discussing something in low voices. They all turned when Dante entered, their expressions a mix of respect and wariness. Gentlemen, Dante said smoothly, his tone calm, but there was a certain finality to it. We have a situation. Emma felt her throat tighten. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't a part of this world. But Dante had made it clear. She was with him, whether she liked it or not. The men at the table didn't acknowledge her, but they didn't need to. She could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up, wondering what she was doing in their world. Dante's attention never wavered. He was in control as always. The Volkovs have made their move, he continued, his voice low and steady. They've underestimated me. And now, they'll pay for it. Emma didn't ask what he meant. She could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. The room was filled with tension, and Emma felt it in every bone of her body. Dante wasn't just going to protect himself. He was going to destroy anyone who threatened him. The men at the table nodded in agreement, their loyalty to Dante clear. Emma realized, with a jolt, that this wasn't just a meeting. This was a declaration of war. Dante had already made his decision, and now the wheels of his plan were set in motion. And Emma, by his side, would have to follow along. She had no choice now. She wasn't just a spectator in this world, she was part of it. The weight of that thought hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was in the middle of something far bigger than herself. She had saved Dante's life. And now, he was returning the favor. But at what cost? The tension in the room deepened, and Dante turned to face her, his expression hardening. Stay close, he repeated, his voice firm. Things are about to get dangerous. Emma swallowed hard. She knew that already. But she also knew that no matter what happened, she couldn't turn away now. She was part of this world, for better or worse. And there was no going back. The meeting room was quiet, the air thick with tension. Dante stood at the head of the table, his eyes cold and unyielding as he surveyed the men gathered around him. Emma sat off to the side, trying to remain inconspicuous, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. She wasn't supposed to be part of this, but somehow, she had become an integral piece in Dante's world. She had saved him, and now he was protecting her, pulling her deeper into a web of danger and power she didn't fully understand. She had to stay calm. She had no choice but to follow his lead. The Volkovs won't stop. Dante's voice broke the silence, his words cutting through the room like a blade. They'll come after us with everything they have. We need to be ready. His eyes flicked over to the men in the room, and Emma could feel the shift in the air. The power dynamic had shifted. It was no longer just about survival. This was war. The men nodded in agreement, their expressions grim. They knew what was at stake. The Volkov family was powerful, with resources that stretched far beyond what Dante's enemies could comprehend. But Dante wasn't someone to back down. He wasn't someone who was going to let anyone stand in his way. We take the fight to them, Dante continued, his voice unwavering. We hit them where it hurts. There was a fire in his eyes, a dangerous determination that sent a chill down Emma's spine. She had never seen him like this, so raw, so focused. She had only known him as the cold, calculating boss, the man who held the city in his grip. But now, she was seeing a different side of him, a side that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. As the men around the table began to discuss their strategy, Emma felt herself slipping into the background. She had no business being here, no reason to be included in these conversations. But somehow, Dante had decided she was worth protecting. She wasn't sure why, but it was clear now that there was more at play than just survival. This wasn't just about him. It was about loyalty. It was about something bigger. Emma, Dante said, pulling her from her thoughts. His voice was sharp, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. You're with me on this. Emma's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's gaze softened for the briefest moment. You've already proven yourself. You saved my life. Now, I'm asking you to trust me. The words hit her like a wave, crashing into her chest. She had trusted him already, hadn't she? She had risked everything to help him, to warn him when it mattered most. But this was different. This was dangerous. I don't know what to do, she said honestly, her voice shaking. I'm just a waitress. Dante's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something vulnerable in his gaze. You're not just a waitress, he said, his tone soft but firm. You're someone I trust. And that means everything in this world. Emma didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't sure if she could ever understand the world Dante lived in. But right now, she knew that she couldn't back down. She had already crossed the line. There was no turning back. Dante turned back to his men, his face hardening as the plans for the next move took shape. Emma watched him, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a player in this dangerous game, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The Volkovs were coming, and Dante was preparing to take them down. The room buzzed with quiet energy as the final details were worked out. Emma felt her stomach twist. This was real. The stakes had never been higher. She had a choice now. She could either stay and fight alongside Dante, or she could run. But there was nowhere left to run. She had already made her choice. The door to the room opened, and a man stepped inside, his expression tense. "We've got movement," he said, his voice low. "The Volkovs are already making their move." Dante's eyes flared with fury. "Get ready," he ordered. The men sprang into action, but Emma felt rooted to the spot. This was it. The moment they had all been waiting for. The moment the battle would begin. Dante turned to her once more, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said, his voice commanding. "This is about to get dangerous." Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew that she had no choice but to follow him. Whatever happened next, she would face it by his side. And that thought alone sent a shiver down her spine. She was in this now, for better or worse. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as Dante stood, his posture rigid, every muscle in his body coiled in anticipation. Emma watched from the corner of the room, trying to keep her thoughts focused, but the overwhelming rush of fear and uncertainty made it difficult. The Volkovs were making their move, and they were not to be underestimated. She had already seen firsthand how dangerous they were. But now, everything was coming to a head. Dante turned sharply to one of his men. "Prepare the team," he ordered, his voice as cold and commanding as ever. The man nodded and swiftly left the room, leaving the air thick with silence. Emma could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. She wasn't just a bystander in this world anymore. She had already made her choice, standing by Dante's side after everything that had happened. But as she saw the deadly seriousness in his eyes, the reality of the situation hit her once again. "Are you ready?" Dante asked, his eyes never leaving the door as his men moved into position. Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was ready. How could she be? She had no experience in this world, no understanding of the intricacies of organized crime or power struggles. All she knew was that she had already crossed a line, and there was no going back now. Dante caught her eye, a fleeting moment of softness passing between them. "Stick with me," he said, his voice low, "and don't let anyone else get in your way." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had no intention of backing down now. As much as she wanted to escape, as much as the fear clawed at her insides, she had already committed to this dangerous path. She was in this world now, and she would face whatever came next with Dante. The minutes seemed to drag on, each second feeling like an eternity. Dante's men continued to prepare, checking weapons and equipment, silently moving in a coordinated rhythm. Finally, the door opened again, and one of Dante's closest allies stepped in. "The Volkovs are moving in on our territory. They've got the east side locked down. It's happening now." Dante didn't react immediately, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. He had been waiting for this, but the time had come. It was no longer just about protecting himself. It was about securing his place in the city. About making sure the Volkovs knew they couldn't take what was his. "We move now," Dante said, his voice steady, filled with the kind of certainty that only someone like him could possess. He turned to Emma, his gaze intense. "Stay close. I won't let anything happen to you." She nodded, the words a comfort and a threat all at once. As they moved through the building, Emma felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. They were about to walk straight into a storm, and there was no way to predict how it would end. Dante led the way, his movements purposeful, his focus unshakable. Emma followed behind, her heart racing as they descended into the basement where the emergency vehicles were parked. The moment they stepped outside, the cool night air hit them, and Emma could feel the shift in the atmosphere. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was war. The streets of Brooklyn were eerily quiet, but Emma could feel the danger lurking around every corner. Dante's men flanked them as they made their way to the vehicles. Emma was acutely aware of every step, every sound, as they made their way into the convoy. The car doors slammed shut, and the convoy moved out, speeding down the empty streets. The Volkovs had made their move, and Dante was prepared to fight back. The city, once full of life and noise, now felt like a battlefield, the quiet before the storm. As they approached the east side of the city, the tension in the air thickened. Emma's heart was in her throat, her mind racing with questions, but she couldn't afford to ask them now. The stakes were too high. They were about to go into enemy territory, and there was no turning back. Dante was a man who played by his own rules, and right now, those rules were about to be tested. As they pulled up to a nondescript building, Emma's hand gripped the seat, her knuckles white. Dante turned to her, his eyes hard. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice cold. "This is where it all ends." Emma wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no way out now. They were about to face the Volkovs head-on, and she would have to trust that Dante knew what he was doing. He was their leader, their protector, and in this moment, Emma had no choice but to follow him into the storm. The moment they stepped into the building, Emma felt the weight of the situation settle heavily on her shoulders. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only came when people were preparing for war. Dante moved ahead, his bodyguards flanking him on all sides, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every potential threat. Emma followed close behind, her pulse quickening with every step. They were in enemy territory now, and there was no turning back. As they made their way through the dimly lit hallways, the sound of their footsteps echoed, a constant reminder of how exposed they were. Dante's men were alert, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that danger was lurking just beyond the next corner. "Stay close." Dante's voice broke through her thoughts. She nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew that whatever it was going to be brutal. The Volkov family wasn't just a rival. They were a force to be reckoned with. They had power, resources, and connections that extended far beyond what Dante could control. But he wasn't the kind of man to back down from a fight. Not now, not ever. As they reached the center of the building, Dante paused, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the area. "Get ready," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with authority. "This is where it all happens." The room they entered was larger than Emma had expected. It was stark, industrial, with steel beams overhead and exposed concrete walls. There were several men gathered around a table, speaking in low voices, their eyes flicking to Dante as he entered. It was clear they knew who he was, and they weren't happy to see him. "You're late," one of the men said, his tone dismissive. Dante's gaze flicked to him, his face expressionless. "I'm not here to make friends," he replied, his voice cold and steady. "I'm here to settle this once and for all." The room fell silent, the tension thickening like a storm cloud about to burst. Emma could feel her stomach twisting in knots. She had never been this close to the epicenter of a power struggle like this. She was just a waitress, a simple girl caught in a world she didn't belong in. But now, she was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. Dante moved to the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the men around him. He didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of weakness. He was the Mafia boss, powerful, unyielding, a man who had built his empire with his bare hands. But even he knew that this wasn't going to be easy. The Volkov family wasn't just going to roll over and let him take control. They were coming for him. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over?" one of the men sneered. "The Volkovs have this city in the palm of their hand. You're nothing but a small-time player." Dante's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening. "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice low but filled with venom. "I'm not just playing for control. I'm playing for survival. And you're going to learn what happens when you underestimate me." The room was charged with electricity now. It was clear that there was no turning back. This wasn't just about power. This was about dominance. Dante wasn't just going to fight for what was his. He was going to take what he deserved. The Volkov family had made a mistake, and now they were going to pay the price. Emma stood at the edge of the room, her heart racing as she watched Dante. She had never seen him like this before, so raw, so fierce. It was like a switch had flipped inside him, and he had become something even more dangerous than she had imagined. She could see it in the way he held himself, the way he spoke, the way he commanded the room. This was a man who had been through hell and back, and he wasn't about to let anyone take what was his. The men around the table shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. Dante's presence was overwhelming. and it was clear that they were beginning to realize just how serious he was. "We've already won," one of them said, trying to regain some composure. "You're outnumbered, outgunned. You don't stand a chance." Dante's lips curled into a cold smile. "You're wrong," he said again. "I've been outnumbered before. I've been outgunned. But I always come out on top." He turned to his men, signaling them to move into position. "It's time to end this," he said. "Take them down." The room exploded into chaos. The sound of gunfire rang out, and Emma's heart nearly stopped as she ducked for cover. This was it. The fight for survival had begun. Dante's men were fast and precise, taking out the Volkov's men with ruthless efficiency. Emma could barely keep up as they moved through the room, the chaos unfolding before her. She had never imagined she'd be part of something like this. The gunfire was deafening, the air thick with the smell of smoke and blood. She could feel her pulse racing, her breaths coming in short gasps as she tried to stay out of the way. But even in the middle of the chaos, one thing was clear: Dante was in control. He moved through the room like a force of nature, his eyes focused on the prize. There was no hesitation in his actions, no second-guessing. He was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stop him now. The chaos in the room continued as the sounds of gunfire rang out, filling the air with tension and violence. Emma crouched low, trying to stay out of the line of fire as Dante and his men moved with military precision, taking down the remaining Volkov soldiers one by one. Every step Dante took was calculated, his movements cold and efficient, showing no hesitation as he cleared the room. Emma's heart raced in her chest, her ears ringing from the sharp sounds of gunshots and the shuffling of feet on the concrete floor. This wasn't just a fight. It was a war Dante had been preparing for, a war that had now pulled her into its grasp. She had been part of this world for days, but tonight had changed everything. She could feel the weight of Dante's leadership, the way his presence commanded the room, the way his men followed him without question. As she watched him move, she couldn't help but wonder just how far he would go to make sure he stayed on top. The Volkov family had made a deadly mistake in underestimating him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. "Keep moving." Dante's voice snapped through the chaos, breaking Emma's reverie. She quickly followed him, her body tense with the intensity of the moment. The final Volkov soldiers were regrouping, but they were clearly outmatched. Dante's men were too fast, too trained. They pushed forward, clearing the room until all that remained were the dead and dying. Dante stood in the middle of the room, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His face was impassive, but there was something in his eyes, something darker, that Emma couldn't quite place. "It's over," Dante said, his voice cold as he surveyed the aftermath. Emma stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. She had been in the middle of a Mafia war, but now that it was over, the silence felt even more deafening. Dante turned toward her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone softening slightly. Emma swallowed hard, still trying to wrap her mind around the brutal reality she had just witnessed. "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Just a little shaken." Dante nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "You did well. You stayed calm." Emma didn't know how to respond. How could she stay calm in the middle of all that? But somehow she had, and that terrified her. She had been in the midst of violence, in the middle of a fight she hadn't even known existed until Dante had dragged her into it. And yet, here she was, alive. Dante walked over to the table where the Volkov men had been sitting, his expression unreadable. He picked up a folder, flipping through the contents with practiced ease. Emma couldn't help but feel like an outsider in this world, even now. She had seen enough to know that Dante was dangerous, but she still didn't understand everything. He turned back to face her, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. "You've seen what I'm capable of now," he said, his voice low. "But you need to understand something. This is just the beginning." Emma's stomach tightened at the words. She had already been through more than she ever imagined she would, and yet, Dante was telling her that it wasn't over. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dante's expression darkened. "The Volkovs won't let this go. They'll come for us again. And when they do, we'll be ready. But this time, I won't just be protecting myself." His words hung in the air, filled with a weight that Emma couldn't ignore. She realized, in that moment, that Dante wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for dominance, for control over everything he had built. And no matter what, he would make sure he came out on top. Emma's mind raced as she tried to process the gravity of what Dante had just said. She wasn't sure what her place was in all of this, but she knew she couldn't walk away now. Not after everything she had seen, not after everything she had done. Dante's gaze softened just for a moment, and for the briefest of seconds, Emma saw a flicker of the man behind the Mafia boss. The man who had lost everything, who had fought to build something from the ashes. But that flicker was gone almost immediately, replaced once again by the cold, unyielding presence of the man in charge. "Get some rest," he said, his voice low. "We have work to do tomorrow." Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure how she could sleep after everything that had happened. As she left the room, the weight of Dante's words pressed down on her. There was no turning back. She had entered this world of violence and power, and now she had to survive it. The storm had just begun, and Emma had no idea what would come next. All she knew was that she couldn't walk away now. Not after everything she had already done. She was in it for the long haul. The morning after the battle, the silence in the building was almost deafening. The aftermath of the fight with the Volkov family still hung in the air, thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Emma stood by the window, looking out at the city below, trying to wrap her mind around everything that had happened. The chaos, the violence, the lives lost. It felt like she had been thrust into a different world overnight. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, or if she could even recognize the life she had left behind. The past few days had turned her world upside down, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Dante's words echoed in her mind. This is just the beginning. She had seen him at his most ruthless, but she had also seen a side of him that was human, vulnerable. In a strange way, she understood him now. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man shaped by loss, by pain, by the need to survive. And now, with the Volkovs defeated, he was preparing for the next battle. Emma didn't know how to feel about that. Part of her wanted to leave, to escape this life before it swallowed her whole. But she couldn't. She had already made her choice. Dante had protected her, and in return, she had saved him. She owed him, and the loyalty that had begun as a simple act of survival was now something much deeper. She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but she knew it was dangerous. Just as her thoughts were swirling, the door to the room opened, and Dante walked in. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark with the weight of whatever was to come. "We need to move," he said simply, his voice cold. Emma turned to face him, a chill running down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Volkovs may have lost this battle, but the war is far from over," Dante said, his gaze locking onto hers. "We've made enemies, Emma, and enemies don't just disappear. We have to be prepared for what's coming." Emma felt her stomach twist. She had already seen the violence Dante was capable of, but hearing him speak about it so casually made her realize just how much danger they were still in. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this life, but she had no choice but to follow him. Dante turned toward the door. "Come on. We need to get to the safe house." Now, Emma hesitated for a moment before following him. She knew there was no point in questioning him anymore. She had already learned that Dante didn't wait for anyone to catch up. He moved forward, and everyone else had to follow. As they made their way down the hall, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The Volkovs weren't just going to give up their power that easily. Dante had put them in their place, but they would fight back. She had seen it in their eyes. The Mafia world didn't work by the rules of fairness or honor. It was survival of the fittest, and right now, Dante was on top. But how long would that last? The car ride to the safe house was quiet. Dante sat in the front, his bodyguard driving, while Emma sat in the back, lost in her thoughts. The city outside the window looked calm, but Emma knew better. She had learned the hard way that danger could be lurking around any corner, and she had no idea where it might come from next. As they neared the safe house, Dante finally spoke again, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of something darker. "They'll come for us. But we're ready," he said. "We'll make sure they know they made a mistake." Emma glanced at him, unsure of what to say. She wasn't like him. She hadn't been trained to live this life, to survive in a world of crime and corruption. All she knew was that Dante had taken her under his wing, and somehow, she had become part of his world. As they pulled up to the safe house, Dante turned to her, his eyes softening for a moment. Stay close. We're not safe until we're inside. She nodded, her heart still racing as she followed him into the building. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. The safe house was exactly what it sounded like, a place to lie low, a temporary refuge from the chaos of the outside world. But Emma knew it wouldn't last. Nothing ever did. Dante's men moved swiftly, securing the perimeter and checking for any potential threats. Dante, meanwhile, stood in the center of the room, his arms crossed as he surveyed everything around him. He was a man who had built his empire from the ground up, a man who was constantly calculating, always one step ahead of his enemies. But Emma could see the toll it had taken on him. He was a leader, a fighter, but he was also human. And no matter how many times he had fought to stay on top, the weight of the world was starting to show. Dante finally turned to Emma, his gaze intense. "We'll be fine," he said, though she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "But I need you to understand something. This is just the beginning. We'll need to fight even harder to protect what we've built." Emma nodded, knowing that the fight was far from over. The Volkovs were only the first wave of enemies. There would be others, and Dante would face them head-on. She had already made her decision. She wasn't backing down now. Whatever came next, she would stand by his side. She owed him that much. The safe house was eerily quiet after the chaos of the past few days. The walls, bare and cold, seemed to hold the tension that hung thick in the air. Dante paced the room, his mind clearly at work, plotting the next move in the ongoing battle for control. Emma sat in the corner, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The calmness of the room only made her feel more unsettled. She had survived the first wave of violence, but it was clear that the war was far from over. Dante had made that much clear. He was preparing for what came next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into even more danger. The Volkovs were not just going to accept defeat. They would come back, and this time, they would be more ruthless. Dante had already shown his strength, but Emma wasn't sure if he could protect them both from what was coming. Her mind wandered to the future, to what would happen when the Volkovs made their move again. She didn't know how to fight this battle, but Dante did. He was a man of power, a man who had built his empire with blood and grit, and now, he was ready to defend it at all costs. But how much longer could he keep up this fight? Emma's thoughts were interrupted when Dante turned to her, his dark eyes piercing her, as if he could read her mind. "You're still here," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. She didn't need to ask what he meant. He had seen the hesitation in her, the uncertainty that had settled deep inside her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Dante studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "Good," he said simply, before turning his attention back to the room. There was no more time for doubt. The Volkovs would be coming, and they needed to be ready. Dante's men were already making preparations, securing the perimeter, checking their weapons, making sure every detail was accounted for. They had no room for mistakes. Emma watched them work, their movements swift and efficient. She knew they were experts in their field, but they were also men who lived in a world that she didn't understand. She felt like an outsider, watching the storm from the sidelines, powerless to change anything. But Dante had made it clear. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was part of this world now, and there was no going back. Dante finally spoke, his voice low but filled with resolve. "We move tonight. The Volkovs won't expect it. We hit them hard, fast, and we make sure they know we're not backing down." Emma nodded, though her stomach churned. She didn't know what it meant to hit back like that, but she trusted Dante. In this world, trust was the only thing that mattered. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Dante's men were ready. He was ready. And as the sun began to set, Emma found herself once again in the midst of something she couldn't fully comprehend. Dante had always been a man of action, but tonight, he was a man on a mission. Emma couldn't deny that a part of her admired that, even if it terrified her. The fight they were about to face would change everything, and she knew that there would be no turning back once it started. As the evening grew darker, the tension grew. Dante's men were already positioned, waiting for the signal to move. Emma stood by the window, her eyes scanning the empty streets below. The city was quiet, almost too quiet, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to explode. When Dante entered the room again, his eyes were steely, his jaw set in a determined line. "It's time," he said, His voice was calm, but there was an underlying intensity that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. She nodded, her body instinctively moving to follow him. There was no more hesitation now. They were in this together, and whatever happened next, she would face it with him. As they left the safe house and stepped into the night, Emma's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment. The moment they would either reclaim their power or lose everything. Dante didn't look back, but Emma could feel the weight of his presence beside her. The city felt different now, darker, more dangerous, but it was also a place where power could be seized and held. Dante had built his empire, and now he was about to fight for it. Emma didn't know what role she played in all of this. She didn't know if she was strong enough to face what was coming. But she did know one thing. She wasn't alone. And that was enough for now. The night air was thick with anticipation as Dante and his men moved through the shadows, their footsteps silent but purposeful. Emma walked just behind him, her eyes darting from side to side, scanning every alley, every corner, every potential threat. She wasn't used to this life, this world that Dante had pulled her into, but she couldn't back down now. Not after everything. Not after what she had already witnessed. Dante's expression was unreadable, his face a mask of concentration as he led them deeper into enemy territory. He had made it clear. This was their chance to strike, to hit back at the Volkovs before they could regroup and retaliate. There was no turning back. They were in it now, all the way. Emma's mind raced as she followed him, her pulse quickening. This was different. The stakes were higher. They weren't just defending themselves anymore. They were going on the offensive. The Volkovs had made their move, and Dante was ready to make sure they paid for it. As they neared the building where they would make their stand, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment settle in. She was standing beside a man who controlled an empire, a man who had fought to build his power from the ground up. And now, she was part of it. But what did that mean for her? Was she just a pawn in his game, or did she have a role to play? She didn't know. She only knew that she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything. Dante stopped in front of a nondescript door, his hand resting on the handle. He turned to his men, his gaze sharp. "Get ready," he said, his voice low. "We move in fast. We take them by surprise." His men nodded, their faces grim but determined. Dante didn't waste time with speeches. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to inspire loyalty, to make people believe in his ability to lead them through any challenge. Emma could see it in their eyes as they prepared, the respect they had for him, the unwavering trust that he would get them through this. She wasn't sure if she felt the same way, but she knew one thing. He was their leader, and they would follow him without question. The door opened, and they stepped inside, the cool air inside the building a stark contrast to the hot tension outside. The room was dimly lit, with only a few overhead lights flickering on the walls. It was bare, functional, and devoid of any personal touch, just the kind of place where business was conducted. "Stay close," Dante said, his voice steady as he moved forward. "And don't make a sound." Emma followed him, her steps silent, her heart pounding in her chest. They reached the far side of the room, where a group of men were gathered around a table, their voices low and tense as they discussed their next move. The Volkovs were here. They had already set up, preparing for whatever Dante had in store for them. But Dante was ready. He had been preparing for this moment, and he wasn't about to let them take control again. "You're late," one of the Volkov men said, his voice dripping with contempt. Dante didn't flinch. He didn't react to the challenge. Instead, he simply stared at the man, his eyes cold and calculating. "I don't have time for games," Dante said, his voice low but carrying authority. "You've underestimated me, and now you're going to pay for it." The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Emma could feel her heart racing, her breath shallow. This was it, the showdown she had been dreading, the moment when the power struggle between Dante and the Volkovs would come to a head. The Volkov man sneered, his hand resting on the table, fingers twitching as though ready to spring into action. But before anyone could move, Dante's men were already in position, guns raised, eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. The Volkovs were trapped. "You're outnumbered," Dante said, his voice cold as he stepped forward. "You've lost." The Volkov man gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with fury. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think you can take over just like that?" Dante didn't flinch. "I didn't take over. I'm just finishing what I started." He signaled to his men, and the room erupted into chaos. Gunfire rang out, the sound deafening in the small space. Emma ducked, instinctively shielding herself as bullets flew, the walls shaking with each impact. The Volkovs fought back, but it was clear they were no match for Dante's trained crew. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed. As the dust settled and the gunfire subsided, Emma stood, her heart racing, her hands trembling. The Volkovs were on the ground, their bodies sprawled across the floor, their attempts at resistance crushed in an instant. Dante stood at the center of the room, his expression cold as he surveyed the aftermath. "It's over," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. But Emma could see the toll it had taken on him. The fight, the violence, it was all part of who he was. And she was part of it too now. "We're not done yet," Dante added, his gaze flicking over to Emma. "But this battle is won. The Volkovs won't be back." Emma didn't know how to respond. She had just witnessed a massacre, the brutal end to a fight she had never fully understood. But she also understood one thing. This was the world Dante lived in. This was the world he had built, and now, she was a part of it. Whether she liked it or not. The days following the fight with the Volkovs were quiet, but in that silence, a storm was brewing. Emma stood at the window of the safe house, her gaze distant as she watched the city below. Dante's victory was only temporary, she knew that. The world he lived in, a world of power, violence, and constant threats, didn't allow for long moments of peace. She had seen it firsthand, how quickly things could spiral into chaos. But despite the uncertainty of their situation, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose. After everything, after the bloodshed and the danger, she was still standing by his side. She had become a part of this world, whether she was ready for it or not. The past few days had revealed things she never thought she would witness. Dante had always been a man of control, a man who ruled with an iron fist, but she had seen a side of him that was more than just a mafia boss. She had seen the vulnerability in his eyes, the moments of hesitation that flashed through when he thought no one was looking. He was human, after all, but the world they lived in didn't leave much room for weakness. Dante walked into the room, his steps heavy, his presence filling the space. He was a man who had built an empire with his bare hands, but Emma could see the weight of it in the lines on his face, the weariness in his eyes. He had fought to get here, and he would fight to stay at the top. "We need to move," he said, his voice firm, breaking her from her thoughts. "The Volkovs are down, but there are others who will come after us. They always do." Emma nodded, her stomach tightening. She knew this day would come. She had seen it in his eyes before. There was always another battle, another enemy lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But she wasn't backing down now. She had already crossed the line into this world, and there was no turning back. Dante turned toward her, his gaze softening for a moment. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Emma hesitated, but only for a second. She had learned to trust him, to follow him, even when she didn't fully understand the path they were on. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Dante's eyes flickered with something that could have been gratitude, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He turned away, his focus shifting back to the task at hand. "Good, because this fight is far from over. But we'll face it together." Together. The word echoed in Emma's mind. She hadn't expected to find herself here, in the middle of a dangerous world, but here she was. And somehow, she had become a part of Dante's world. They were in this together now, for better or worse. Dante's men gathered around, preparing for the next move, ready to take the fight too. Whoever dared to challenge them. They had faced enemies before, and they would face them again. But this time, Emma felt a shift. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about loyalty. And Dante had proven, time and again, that loyalty was everything to him. Emma walked beside him as they moved toward the exit, the weight of the decision to stay by his side settling over her like a heavy cloak. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She wasn't running away. Not anymore. As they stepped out into the night, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Volkovs might have fallen, but there were always more enemies, more battles to fight. And yet, she found herself strangely calm. She had made her choice. She would stand by Dante, no matter what came next. They had both been shaped by the world they lived in, both forged by the violence, the betrayals, and the constant fight for survival. But somewhere along the way, they had found something in each other, something that made them stronger. The city was quiet now, the streets empty and still. But Emma knew that wasn't going to last. The storm was coming, and when it did, Dante would be ready. And so would she. Together, they would face whatever came next. As they walked down the street, the night air cool against her skin, Emma felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk. And for the first time in a long time, Emma knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. There was no going back, no turning away. She had found her place in this world, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away. They were in this for the long haul, for whatever came next. If you enjoy captivating romance stories filled with intense emotions, twists, and suspense, this is the perfect journey for you. Immerse yourself in a world where power, betrayal, and love collide in unexpected ways. Follow the story of a mafia boss and a woman caught in the whirlwind of danger, loyalty, and passion. As their journey unfolds, you'll find yourself drawn into a world that tests both their strength and their hearts. With romance stories like these, filled with powerful connections and high stakes, you won't want to miss a single moment. Watch as each chapter builds the tension, leading to heart-stopping moments where love and danger intertwine. These romance stories keep you on the edge of your seat, leaving you wondering what will happen next. Get ready for a roller coaster ride of emotions, as the bond between the two protagonists grows stronger with every challenge they face together. Will love conquer all, or will the world they live in tear them apart? The stakes have never been higher in this unforgettable tale. Romance stories don't always follow the path you expect, and this one proves that sometimes love is found in the most dangerous places. Join us as the story unfolds, and experience the twists and turns that will leave you hooked. This is just the beginning of a journey that explores not only love but loyalty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of standing by someone in a world where trust is hard to come by. Dive into this world of romance stories and let the adventure sweep you away.